My name is Max Garrett, and it's an opportunity for me to tell you something about my life. I was born in my grandmother Tolman's home, who was the mother of my mother. She was a midwife, and both my twin brother and I were born on the dining room table in her home. Now, I'm going to tell you about how much fun it was to be a twin. My parents were Barbara Patterson Garrett, and Joseph Burgess Garrett, and my twin brother's name was Mark. And it was fun being a twin because I was never alone. We did everything together. We went to school, walked to school together. We were always in the same classes in school, except until we got into junior high and high school when we were able to choose our own subjects. But one thing I need to tell you about Mark, he didn't like school, but I did. And I got good grades all the time, and he didn't care whether he got bad grades or not. When we had homework to do, I would always do my homework, and Mark, he would just copy my homework so that he didn't have to do any studying. But it was fun being with him because, like I say, we did everything together. And now we had an older brother, Ralph, that we did things with. We used to go hiking in the hills, and probably the most scary thing that I remember when I was a youth is one time it was spring break from school, and Ralph and Mark and I and a friend of ours decided to go on a hike. So we hiked up to the U on the Mountain in Salt Lake City, and from there we went across the hillsides, in the mountains, and we ended up at Hogle Zoo. Well, the first animal that we looked at was Princess Alice, an elephant. Now, there were bars there to keep people out, but they were high bars. And before I knew what happened, Princess Allison swooped around with her trunk and grabbed me around the waist and pulled me inside and lifted me up with her trunk. Scared? Of course I was scared. How would you like to be picked up by an elephant? So that's one thing I'll always, always remember in my youth.
How old were you?
I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. Not very big, and I've always been small. And that elephant picked me up. Now, another thing about Mark, like I say, he didn't care even though we weren't identical twins, people got us mixed up. I was called Mark a lot of times. And more than once, I was called in the principal's office and had no clue what it was about. It was something that Mark had done that I got blamed for, which was okay. Mark could just laugh about it, ha, ha, ha. And the interesting thing about it is that when I was in college, I had a roommate that looked more like me than my own twin brother. His name was Dick Robinson, and he had a beautiful singing voices. And I'd be walking on campus, and people would compliment me on the solos that I sang, and I don't sing at all. And so I used to correct them, but it happened so often that when I got home, I'd just say, Dick, I got a lot of compliments for you today on your beautiful voice. That happened many, many times. Now, after I graduated from high school, I'm going to tell you now about graduation. After I graduated from high school, I went to Elias Business College for just a short time, getting ready to go on my mission, and I went on a mission to Uruguay. At that time, it was 2.5 years, so I spent 2.5 years in Uruguay, which I enjoyed very much. And while I was in Uruguay, the Korean War started, and so I knew that I was going to be drafted in the Army as soon as I got home. And I was home for just the summer, and then I got drafted in the Army. And it was right after I got home from my mission that I met my wife. And how I met her is one of my missionary companions that was already home called me on the telephone and said, we're having a missionary party, get a date and we'll double date. And I said, I just got home, I don't know any girls, maybe you can find me a blind date. So he asked the girl that he was dating to find me a blind date. Well, she didn't know me, so she wasn't very anxious to find a blind date for someone she didn't even know. Well, he said, well, come and go with us anyway. So we were a threesome, and she was his date. That's how I met her. She was my missionary companion's date, and that's how I met her. Well, later on in the evening, they were going to a movie after. He didn't invite me to the movie, but she did, to go with him. So the three of us went, and then a few months later, when I was at LDS Business College, she worked for the Improvement Era, and they had an office in one of the buildings at the college there. And I went to my locker room, and that's when I saw her for the second time, and I started talking to her and find out more about her, and we started dating. And I told her that I had to go in the service and I was going to be gone for 2 years, and she thought, well, I can't get involved with someone that's going to be gone for 2 years. But we did correspond while I was in the service. I did end up in Korea, and I'll tell you about what I did in Korea. So anyway, I went to Fort Bliss, Texas, and that's where I trained. And that was our artillery training. And so when I finally got, my greatest fear about being in the Army, and there was a war on, that I was going to have to shoot somebody, the enemy, and that bothered me to no end. But I landed in Korea, and come to find out that I was on the largest air base in South Korea, which was called K-55. And the reason I was on this air base is because there were, we had cannon, we had guns around the air base to protect it. I never did see one of those guns. I was stationed in the headquarters battery taking care of personnel records, but they came to me because they checked my records in personnel and found out that I had accounting classes, and they said, would you be the bookkeeper in the NCO club? And I said, I don't want to do that, because the NCO club is a bar. I've never been in a bar, and I'm not about to be in one, because that club opened at 5 o'clock, and the soldiers came in there, and all they did was drink and everything, and I didn't want to have any part of that. And they said, well, okay. Well, 2 or 3 weeks passed by, and they came by to me again and said, would you please do that? We can't get anyone else. And I said, on one condition, that I don't have to be there after 5 o'clock. So I ended up being the bookkeeper in the NCO club. I'd go to work in the morning, and I was maybe do the book work for an hour, and I was through for the rest of the day. I was my own boss, and so I could do anything I wanted. And the blessing that came to that is that I ended up being the LDS group leader for the air base, responsible for all religious activity that we had in the air base, responsible for the Sunday meetings and everything. And to me, it was serving it was almost like a second mission. In fact, when it came time for me to come home, I really didn't want to come home because I was having so much fun doing church services over there. But I did come home.
Okay, the time we were born in 1930, 31, around that time was the Great Depression throughout the world. People were losing their jobs, and people had to move, and people were just scraping by. It was a terrible time, and my folks had to leave because everybody was losing their homes. And that's the time when we grew up. But then 10 years later, let's see, about 10 or 15 years later, was the Second World War. And that I remember distinctly. Everything was rationed. You couldn't buy silk clothes, and you had coupons for gas, and you could only get one pair of shoes a year, and meat was rationed, and it was just a terrible. But the bigger the family, the greater, because you got more coupons to buy things with. And a lot of things were rationed, and it was just.
Now, in connection with that, a coupon book was issued to each member of the family, so that's why she said if you had the more coupon books, the better off you were. So we had a large family, so we had plenty of coupon books. And my oldest sister Dora got married the year I was born, so I just never knew her at home. And then my sister Lois, the next one, She was married. She got married shortly after that, and I don't remember her too well. But she, while her husband was in medical school, she lived at home with us. And I can remember she took Mark and I to school, when we started school. I can still remember walking hand in hand with her up to Douglas School on 13th East, and her taking us to school. And then our brother Ray, he was older. All I can remember about him was dating Delora a lot, and the car that he had. And then Ruth, her husband, was in the service. He was in Europe during the war, and she wrote to him every day. She wrote a letter to her husband, Everett. And then Ralph, of course, we did a lot of things with Ralph because we were closer. And then my youngest brother, Paul, was a Down syndrome, so he was put in American Fork Training School when he was just only about 5 years old. But during the war, people needed jobs, and I got a job working in the local grocery store when I was only about 13 or 14 years old. And you'll never guess what my pay was. When I think of the pay now, I started working for 12.5 cents an hour. I had to work 2 hours for a quarter, 4 hours for 50 cents. And so that was, and when I think of starting salaries now, $14 an hour, and that just boggles my mind. But I did work in the grocery store and go to after school, and all day on Saturday. And but then getting back to after Korea, another job when I started at BYU. After I got discharged from the Army, I went to school at BYU on the GI Bill, which people that had as long as they were in the service. I majored in accounting, and the interesting thing is that one of my classmates said to me one day, "Why don't you come over to my apartment tonight and we will work out our accounting problems together?" I said, "Sure, that'll be fun. I'll do that." So after we got through with doing our homework, I happened to wander into the room of his roommate, and there on the wall was the same picture of her that I had. And I said, "Who's the girl?" I knew who it was, but I said, "Who's the girl?" And he says, "Oh, it's some girl that's on a mission that my roommate's writing to." Well, it came time for her to come home. She didn't come home by bus or train or airplane. She came across the country with a couple that drove home. I knew she'd be home on a certain day, so I went down to her place to wait for her arrival home. Well, guess what? There were 3 other guys in the room, and we were all waiting for the same girl. She had been corresponding with these people. She had I don't know how many more she was writing to, but we were all entertaining each other, all waiting for the same girl, but I went out.
Hey.
Now, my parents...
Stop for just a second. She sounded like she wanted to say something.
Well, I wanted to go back. I hadn't finished about the World War.
Okay.
All the men were going into the service. So therefore, they were employing younger people. Younger people started working at 12 and 13 in the department stores. And that's where the saying Rosie the Riveter came into it time, because the women were going into the ordnance plants, into the factories and making things. I was just going to comment on that.
Do you want to comment on, so did you go on a mission?
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
When I met Max, and he told me he was going away for 2 years to the service, I thought, I'm not going to get involved with him. He's gone for 2 years. I'm in college, and our lives were different, but we decided to correspond. He was gone for 2 years. I had 1 year left of college. Then I went on a mission to the eastern states, and we were still writing. So actually, we corresponded for 3.5 years, just writing letters. But then after that, from the time we met to the time we were married, there was a 4 years lapse in there. But I went to the Eastern States Mission. It was 18 months, and you had to be 23. But I liked it so much that I requested to stay 3 months longer in my mission, which they let me do.
That's awesome. I mean, I think it's fascinating. You probably have a lot of missionary stories you could tell.
One in particular, we contacted a family, a lady by the name of Dorothea Dunham. We called her Dory Dunham. To this day, I still keep in contact with her. She's 100 years old. We still talk on the telephone 2 or 3 times a year, and she's the one I taught the gospel to. Then after we were married, we went on a mission together to Ireland, came home, and then went on another mission, a temple mission to Veracruz, Mexico. Because, who was it that interviewed you, said you would go on a Spanish-speaking mission?
Okay, when I was ordained a bishop, I was interviewed by Elder Haight. And he said, "Oh, I see you went on a Spanish-speaking mission." And I said, "Yes." He says, "Do you still remember the language?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Someday you and your wife will go on a Spanish-speaking mission." So we went to Veracruz, Mexico. But before that happened, I went home and told him what Elder Haight said. And she said, "Well, he means your second wife." But we did go on a mission to Ireland, and then we were home for just a year, and we went to Veracruz, Mexico, and served a temple mission there. Now, we loved Ireland. Veracruz, we went to the temple every day, and we had some nice experiences there. And one thing that I remember is that we always had to hail down a cab off the streets to take us to the temple. And so this one cab driver caught on that we went to the temple every day. So he was out in front of our apartment. He knew what time we had to go to the temple, so he was always out in front of our apartment waiting for us, and he would drive us to the temple. And we would drive into the parking lot in the temple. He says, "Oh, that's Angel Morone up there. I know all about him." I says, "How come?" He said, "Well, I have 2 copies of the Book of Mormon." I said, "Well, why aren't you baptized?" He says, "I'm living with another woman. I never have divorced my first wife." But he did say, "Will you teach my son English?" And I said, "Sure, let him come over to the apartment and I'll teach him English." He says, "And then when you get back to your big ranch in Texas, he can come and work for you." He thought we had a big ranch in Texas, which we didn't have. But the one thing that I remember about serving in the temple there was this older man, he was at least in his 80s, that would come to the temple every Saturday without fail. He would stay all the time the temple was open. And I was working with him one time in initiatory. And he said to me, "Will you tell me what the names say? I don't know how to read." I wanted to give him a big hug because he couldn't even read the names he was doing the work for, but yet he was so faithful doing the work for these people, and he couldn't even read their names. And and then another fellow that used to come, the only means of transportation that he had was a bike. And Veracruz was hot, hot, hot. Veracruz is straight east of Mexico City on the Gulf of Mexico. And it was hot year round. And so he liked me, and he always wanted to give me a hug. Well, riding a bike on the way to the temple, he was just hot and sweaty. Who wants to hug someone that's hot and sweaty? Well, I finally started doing that. And then one time he didn't show up because he used to come off, and he didn't show up. I said, "Well, what happened to Brother Ramos?" He said, "Well, he got hit by a truck on the way to the temple and he was killed." And so I missed those hot, sweaty hugs from him. But people in Mexico are very poor, they're humble, and we enjoyed working there. And my wife learned all of the temple ordinances in Spanish, which was a blessing for her. But she never did get a hold on the language, so I always interpreted for her when we were out in public and speaking that way. But that was a wonderful experience for us. After we got married, we got a call to go to Ireland. Now, they speak English in Ireland, but when we got over there, do you think we could understand those people? It was a foreign language to us. The bishop called us in the office one day to give us some instruction, and we couldn't understand one word he said, even though he was speaking English. But we finally got so we could understand them, and and we loved Ireland. And the main thing that we did there was to reactivate the less active people. That was what we were. So we would go to the bishop's office, and he would give us a list of names, and we would go find these people to try to bring them back into the church. And that's what we did mostly in Ireland. But Mexico was entirely different. It was strictly temple, and we went to the temple every day. Now, one thing I need to tell you about my employment, something new.
Sweetheart, just a minute. Before you leave the temple subjects, we had just come home from Ireland. Was home about a year, and we worked in the Timanogus temple. They were requesting people to work in the Nauvoo temple for just 6 months. We could handle that. Let's do that. So we signed up to work in Nauvoo for 6 months. But then the church called us and said, would you be willing to go to Mexico and work in the temple there for a year and a half? And that was a prophecy.
So instead of working in Nauvoo for 6 months, we ended up in Veracruz, Mexico, which was a lot different.
And like she said, as a fulfillment of prophecy.
Yeah, really, it was a fulfillment of prophecy. And now, as far as my employment, after I graduated from college, I got a job with Deseret Federal Savings and Loan in Salt Lake, doing their bookwork there. And then they decided they wanted a CPA. Well, I wasn't a CPA, so they hired a CPA, and I lost my job. And I got a job with a company called Security Leasing Company, which was owned by Security Bank in Salt Lake, and doing the bookwork. And a company in Minneapolis bought Security Leasing. That's why we ended up in Minneapolis, because our company was sold. So we moved back to Minneapolis, and when we worked for IDS Leasing back there, what they did was they leased things to different companies, like big trucks, cars, things like that. And I worked for them. And then a company in San Diego decided to buy them. So I wasn't going to go to San Diego, so I lost my job with IDS Leasing, and which was a blessing because I didn't want to go to San Diego. And I ended up working for General Mills in Minneapolis. And that's the company I retired from. And General Mills was a very nice company to work for. I always tell people, what did you do there? And I said, well, I punched the holes in the Cheerios.
When we were married, while he was working, every day at noon he would call me on the phone. How are you doing? How are the kids doing? Do you want me to bring home anything from the store? He would always call me every day. Then when he would come home from work, the first words he would say were, what can I do to help? What a blessing, what a blessing. What can I do to help you? There was a lot of things, fixing dinner, a lot of things. Then when we were married 1 year, he brought home 1 rose and has added a rose every year. So this coming August, we'll get 64 roses.
Wow.
Now, something about those roses, a funny story. I go to Costco now, and I just get 3 bunches of roses, which is more than I need. And I had 3 bunches of roses, and I went to the checkout stand, and the lady in front of me looked at me and she said, man, are you in trouble? How come you have all those roses? Are you in trouble, or what's wrong? So I told her what I've been doing for all of these years. I think it was on our 58th anniversary then. And her eyes widened, and she turned around. You know how many people there are at Costco at the checkout stands. Hey, everybody, I want you to look at this man and what he's done for his wife over the years. And I wanted to crawl under the table or hide. And anyway, she checked out, and she came back to me, and she says, hold out your hand. So I went like that, and she slapped a $10 bill in my hand. I says, I don't want that. She says, yes, you do. You take that. She says, that's worth it. So that happened while I was buying roses for my wife at one time. But anyway, after I retired from General Mills, all of our children came out here to school at BYU. None of them stayed in Minnesota, so we sold our home in Minnesota and we moved out back to Utah. And we bought a townhome because we knew we wanted to go on missions, and we could just lock the door and not have to worry about the yard or anything like that. And so that's what happened to our home here in Pleasant Grove. We just locked it up and went on our missions and didn't have to worry about it because the lawns were all taken care of, snow removal in the wintertime, and so that worked out perfect for us.
So we worked in the Chicago Temple, a mission in Veracruz, Mexico, and the Timpanogos Temple.
So were all those missions?
No,
Just Veracruz.
Okay, so
just Veracruz. But we lived, even though we lived in
let me
Minneapolis,
get this straight. Ireland, Veracruz, and then you worked in the temple where again?
we worked at the when we came back. When we moved out here, we started working in the Timpanogos Temple.
Sweetheart, when we were in Chicago,
know,
Minneapolis, we were in the
yeah.
Chicago Temple first.
Yeah, but even though we lived in Minneapolis and it was an 8-hour drive to Chicago, we used to go down there on weekends because I had a working schedule at General Mills where I only worked 3 days a week because I worked 13 hours a day. So I worked on, quite often I'd be through with work on Wednesday, so we'd drive to Chicago on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and we'd come home Saturday night, and we worked in the Chicago Temple once a month for the 3 days that we could drive there. And so then we came out here and worked in the Timpanogos Temple, and I just recently was released from my job at the Timpanogos Temple, so I worked at the Timpanogos Temple for like 22 years. But that was interrupted twice when we went on our missions.
While we were in Minnesota, he was bishop, and then he worked in the Minnesota-Minneapolis Mission Presidency for 5 years, under 3 different mission presidents. And that was traveling the whole mission, giving talks, and that was with your sister and her husband. And that was a fun time. There's no perfect marriage. Every marriage has its ups and downs. This is our way of solving problems. Whenever we had disputes or differences of opinion, we would say to the kids, we're going in the bedroom to have a discussion. We go to the bedroom and close the door, and these were the rules. I could talk as long as I wanted without any interruption, and that way I get all the steam out and all the accusations and everything. I say, okay, I'm through, now it's your turn. He'd do the same thing. Till finally it settled down. We'd gotten all the steam out. We'd gotten all the accusations. After 15 minutes, we came out and we were through. And that's the way we settle our disputes.
In connection with her, when I'd come home from work one day, she met me at the front door as I was coming in. She had the baby in her arms, and she says, here. She handed me the baby. She says, I'm out of here. She got in the car. I had no idea where she was going. She was gone for 4 or 5 hours. She says, it's up to you to get the kids in bed, to give them their baths, to get them
Dinner's
their
ready.
dinner. And she was gone, and she was just worn out from the large family that we had. And I can still remember her. Here, take this baby, and she was gone.
I can relate to that.
Sure.
But anyway, we've had a good marriage. It'll be 64 years, and most of the time, we just enjoy being together, but
I think the fun things too, when you were bishop, we performed marriages up in the canyon. Remember, and they took the glass of wine, and we all marched up in the canyon and performed a marriage up there. We had marriages in our home.
oh yeah, when I performed marriages, I had one, not a canyon, because there's no mountains in Minnesota, but it was a place, and they had the wine and everything, and it was interesting to perform those weddings. And as far as the mission presidency, it was fun because I traveled over into Wisconsin, which was part of our mission, up into northern Minnesota, and I would speak at small branches and just do whatever the mission president wanted me to do. Now, one thing he asked me one time, I remember, he called me on the telephone. He said, I'm going to be out of town. He says, I've got 2 missionaries that are in trouble. Will you go to court with them? And I said, sure, I'll go to court with them. Well, what they had done, they had a car, and while they got out of their car, and one of them found a water pistol in the snowbank, and he put it in his pocket. And after they got in their car, he said to his companion, I'm going to freak the people out that are driving behind us. And he took this water pistol out of his pocket, and he held it against the head of his companion. They went about 4 blocks, and they were surrounded by police cars. And that's what they had done. That's what they got in trouble for. And each one of them was fined $100 for that little prank.
Wow.
But anyway, the fun thing about being in the mission presidency, we traveled all over the mission, and I spoke in the different branches. And it paid off because after I started working in the Timpanogos Temple, one time a lady who I had no idea who she was, she says, I remember you. You spoke at our branch up in Brainerd, Minnesota, which is a little town way up in northern Minnesota. She says, you came and spoke in our branch. And she remembered that. And one time a young lady came, I was taking him into the endowment room, and a young lady came out, and she grabbed onto me and gave me a great big hug. And I said, I don't know who you are. I says, I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are. She says, well, I was just a little girl. You were my bishop back in Minnesota. So things like that were fun, you know, when you meet people out here. And I met another fellow, and he says, they always say you see angels in temples. And she says, I saw you when he was the state president back in Minnesota. He says, and I saw you in the temple out here. And so he says, I saw an angel in the Timpanogos Temple. So it's fun when you can find things like that happen to you in the work that you do in the temple. The church is the greatest thing that has ever happened to us. We have strong testimonies. Fortunately for me, I've been in a lot of Book of Mormon lands in Central and South America, because after my mission, I traveled for 6 weeks all over Central and South America, mainly to visit old Indian ruins. And I knew at one time the Lamanites and the Nephites went to these different sites. So that was a blessing for me to be able to travel in these places and visit these Book of Mormon, we call them the Book of Mormon sites. There were 4 of us that were traveling home together. And
Very true. I want to elaborate a little bit about our family in Minnesota. We were connected to the church, and of course our kids were the only ones members of the church in high school. So our kids would go with non-members. And I was always concerned, you know, how serious they would be with non-members. One daughter says, I would marry that fellow if he'd joined the church. She was so involved with him. Another daughter said, her boyfriend was taking lessons in our home. And he said, my mother wants to come to the lessons to see what you're feeding, to see the trash you're feeding me. So she came to the home, and I was just as courteous as I could be, just oozing with friendliness. And boy, she was just sitting there. And she said to her son, if you join that church, you're out of the house. You leave the house. So we gave lessons. And one time, the missionaries were giving a lesson to a fellow in our home. And our daughter, Bonnie, was waiting for her date to come in. His name was Jimmy. Jimmy came in, and I said, Jimmy, these men have something important to tell you. Why don't you sit down and listen to them? So he did. Jimmy joined the church. And after he'd been, and Jimmy was smart, he had scholarships to high school and colleges. I said, Jimmy, you need to go where there are a lot of members of the church so you can see what you've joined. You need to go to the Brigham Young University. So he did. He went a year to Brigham Young University. After that, I said, Jimmy, you need to go on a mission now. He said, okay. So he did. He went to Italy. He came home, and he got active in the church. I think he was either bishop or in the bishopric.
oh, he was bishop. He ended up being bishop.
And we had a lot of interaction with our kids going with non-members. But, and, you know, I always kept my fingers crossed, you know, they could have left and left the church, but.
Our kids always associated with good people that were non-members. And one thing that the stake had back in Minnesota was that they had dances once a month. And our kids would get these non-members to go to the dances with him, and so they loved those non-member kids loved going to the dances at our church, but they all ended up. 7 of our 8 children served missions. The one that didn't serve in the mission was a daughter that got married when she was 19, but they all served missions, and it was a wonderful experience to have all of them. We had Gary and Galen. Gregory and Gary that overlapped each other because they were just a year apart. So they overlapped their mission. Now, an interesting experience about that. Gary had to go, when he got his mission call, he got a phone call from his mission president. And he said, could you buy a projector and bring it to the mission with you? Well, I'd gone out with Gary to to get all of his clothes and everything ready for his mission. And at one time in my life, I had a brown pinstripe suit that I just loved. This is going back a little bit. And I just loved that suit. And I thought, if I ever see another suit like that, I'm going to buy it. Well, while I was shopping with Gary, guess what? I saw another suit just like that, the one that I wanted. So I bought it. And when the mission president said, would you buy a projector and bring it, we'd spend all of our money. We didn't have any money to buy a projector. Well, this is where the suit comes into view and how the Lord looks out after the missionaries. I had worn that suit twice. I'd gone to church, and I came home from church. And our son Gordon said, Dad, what happened to your suit? I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, just go look at your seat. All the pinstripes are gone off the seat of your pants. So I looked in the mirror, and sure enough, where I was sitting down, the pinstripes were gone. Who's ever heard of the pinstripes going off the seat of a pants? So I took it back to the store, and they refunded my money. That was the cost of the projector to take to the mission field. That's how the Lord looks out for missionaries.
That's amazing.
And so anyway, fun experiences like that. And anyway, our kids all love their missions, and they went all over the world, South America mainly, and Susan Susan went to Bolivia. Most of them went, 2 of them went to Asian countries, to Taiwan and Korea. And but it was a fun experience to send them out in the missions. And
when I was going to University of Utah, I worked part-time in the Salt Lake Temple. When I went there, I saw this beautiful lady. She was older with gray hair, but she was very pretty, very striking. And I always remembered her. Well, I started going with Max and went to his home one time, and he said, I'd like you to meet my sister. And in walked that beautiful lady. It was Dora. I thought, what a coincidence. That beautiful lady that I had admired for so long was his sister.
Well, our 8 children, we had 4 boys and 4 girls. And so one thing that I'll always remember is that we went to a restaurant one time, and with all 8 kids. And so they had to put us right in the middle of the thing, and people were watching us, and some guy came up to me and laid his hand on my shoulder, and he says, we've got a bet going on over at our table whether or not all these children are yours. And I says, which way did you bet? And he says, well, I bet that they weren't. And I says, you lost your bet. But it was fun. 8 children in 12 years, and so they were all close together. And it was just fun having the family. Our oldest son, Gregory, he'd started school, and he'd come home and go to the piano, and he said, this is the tune that we were playing, that we learned in school today, and pluck it out with one finger on the piano. She recognized his talent. So we started him with piano lessons when he was only 8 years old. His hands weren't wide enough to even reach an octave on the piano. And this piano teacher said, I can see the talent he has, so I'll take him and teach him, even though his hands aren't that big. He ended up being our church organist when he was 12 years old. Our organist in Minneapolis, when he was 12 years old, he was the church organist. And
If he's going to accompany you when you're singing, he'll say, what octave do you want that in?
So he was very talented on the piano, and he still is church organist all these years. But all of our children came out to BYU, and they didn't all graduate, but anyway, they all came out west to go to school. And
Oh, sweetheart. They all graduated finally, even Maureen. Oh, Sharon didn't.
Sharon didn't.
That's right.
But they all didn't graduate from BYU. They ended up going to other schools. But anyway, it was. And by the way, she graduated from the University of Utah, and I graduated from BYU. But that's okay. The only time that we have any problems is when BYU have sports together, and she's rooting for Utah, and I'm rooting for BYU. But other than that, we're fine. I'll tell you a funny story that happened. My dad was a great fisherman, and he used to go fishing all the time and take me and Mark and Ralph with him. Sometimes we would go camping for 2 or 3 days. And one of his favorite places to go was East Canyon, up Parley's Canyon, and then we'd drive over to East Canyon, and we'd camp there for 2 or 3 days. Well, the fish bite in the morning and in the evening, so in the daytime, what was there to do except play around? Sometimes we would go in the river and go swimming a little bit. But one time Ralph said, I'm just going to go for a little hike up in the mountains just for fun. And he was gone maybe for a half an hour. And he came back. And we said, did you see anything? Did anything happen? He said, no, I didn't see anything, but I heard a rattlesnake. And so Mark and I said, well, we'll go see if we can find that rattlesnake. So we went up into the hills again. We never did hear or see a rattlesnake, but we found a water snake, and we were able to catch it. So we took it back to camp with us. And Ralph says, well, did you see the rattlesnake? We said, yeah, we found it. Mark says, yeah, here it is, and he threw it at him. You've never seen anyone move so fast in his life when that water snake was thrown at him, thinking it was a rattlesnake. And that was funny. When we went back to camp, Mark and I were kind of chuckling at each other because we were thinking, now the fun begins for 2 little brothers.
When I was 8 years old, we lived in Sunnyside, Utah, in Carbon County. And my folks were going to move back to Salt Lake, and they said, you have your choice. Do you want to be baptized in Sunnyside or wait till we get back to Salt Lake? And they were going to move back there in the spring. I said, well, I'll be baptized in Sunnyside. The church was just a one white frame building. The font and the floor, they'd open a trap door, and the font was just a hole in the floor. And to get to that, there was a ladder against the wall, and you had to climb down that ladder to get into the water. And I remember leaves in the water. And whoever baptized me, it wasn't my father, was down there and baptized me in this hole in the ground. And then I climbed back up that ladder. And that's where I always remember that baptism in Sunnyside.
Sunnyside, Utah is right close to Price, and that's where they lived. My mom and dad, like you know, Mom was real quiet. Dad was a hard worker. He cleaned wallpapers in the springtime, because back then the heating was by coal, and the smoke would get in the house and it would get on the ceilings and the walls, and so Dad had good jobs in the springtime after winter was over to clean wallpaper. And then in the summertime, he would go to the farmer's market and he would buy vegetables. And then we would go from door to door selling them. And I can remember going with him, and we'd knock at the door and we'd say, would you like to buy some fresh fruit? I have some raspberries and other fruit. And so he worked hard to make a living, and they didn't have a lot. And so we, but my mother was very good with her hands. She was always crocheting. She made tablecloths for all of her children. She loved to quilt. She made quilts for all of the children. And she always had a quilt frame in the bedroom where she was always quilting, making a quilt. But I've had pictures of her crocheting and things that she made, and she always made doilies for everybody, and she just was very handy with her hands. And she was told in her patriarchal blessing that she would be blessed with handiwork.
Sweetheart, Your folks both worked in the temple. Tell them about that story.
Oh yeah, my parents my parents both worked in the Salt Lake Temple. That every Tuesday and Wednesday night, we had orders to hurry home from school on Tuesday and Wednesday because we had to be home from school before they went to the temple. Well, they worked there for years and years, and my dad spent a lot of time behind the recommend desk, so a lot of people knew him. And one day, they went on a temple session together. And Dad went up to the veil first, and there was a lady sitting next to my mother. And this lady next to my mother said, "Say, do you know who that brother is that is up in the veil now?" She says, "Yes, that's Brother Garrett." "Well, do you know if his wife is still alive?" And she said, "Yes, she is." She said, "That's too bad. I know at least a dozen women that like to get their hands on him."
And that really happened.
Oh my goodness, what did she do at that point?
She didn't. She never did tell him, "Well, I'm the wife."
She didn't say, I'm his wife?
No, but that happened in the Salt Lake Temple. But they were good people, good, active in the church. Dad loved to sing in the choirs, and he always sang in the choirs. And he thought that he could get his kids singing in the church. So quite often he would make arrangements, and Mark and I would sing a duet in the church quite often. We'd do that every once in a while because our dad wanted us to.
And you cleaned the temple and threw a sponge at the picture.
Oh, and while the temple was closed in Salt Lake, we went down to help clean. And we went home and told my mother, I says, "I threw a wet sponge at my Mark, and I missed him, and it hit one of those beautiful murals in the temple and made a mess." And my mother was just, but that really didn't happen. We were just kidding. Okay, Mark was, like in school, he was kind of mischievous. Back then, the grades that you got in grade school was either a S or an NS. S was for satisfactory, and NS was not satisfactory. I didn't get one NS, but Mark, it didn't bother him. I remember one time he raised his hand. "How come I got an NS in this subject and Dick Vitterly didn't when we were involved in the same thing and you gave me an NS? How come you didn't give Dick Vitterly an NS? But he used to sneak under kids' desks and he would tie their shoelaces together at school. But he ended up being a school teacher, and he absolutely loved it. And so when he would tell me stories about what kids would do at school, I said, "It's just payback for you. You used to do that same thing." One time a kid came to school with his shirt unbuttoned. And so Mark asked him to button his shirt, so the kid pulled all his buttons off his shirt. So he said, "Come on up here," and he took his shirt and he stapled it together with his staple gun. And one time I was working at the temple, and we had a Indian, full-blooded Indian, and he had Indian names. He had 3 names. He had Little Wolf, Little Bear, and No Brains. That was the name, No Brains. And I told Mark about that, and he said, "Oh, I had that kid in one of my classes in school, that No Brains kid." But he loved teaching school, and one thing that I admire about him is that he taught botany, and he got permission from the school, and he built a beehive out of glass, and he drilled a hole in the wall and connected this glass to this beehive. So the bees had come in, and the kids could see the bees inside through this glass, what they did inside of a beehive. That's how interested he was in making sure the kids knew what they were doing. And another thing that a kid did, he says, I was sitting at my desk, and one day, every day, this student would come in, and he would go over to where I had flowers planted in the classroom, and then he'd go back to his desk. Went over and did his desk. He said, "That kid has planted something over there that I don't know about." So he went and checked it out, and this kid had planted a marijuana plant in the classroom. Well, Mark, of course, got rid of it. He took it home. This is when he was bishop, by the way, and he put it home and put it on his kitchen table. And his wife said, "Mark, we can't have that in the table. That's illegal." So she destroyed it while he was at school one day. But the police did come to the school and say, I understand you're growing marijuana in here. He said, I don't have any marijuana plants. Fortunately, he had got rid of that before they came. But that's what a kid did, planted a marijuana plant in the room there one day. But Mark and I had a lot of fun together while growing up together. Like I say, I was never alone. We always did things together and went together. And then when we, my mother dressed us alike as being twins. We were always dressed alike when they were buying clothes. But then when we got our own jobs, we bought our own clothes and we stopped being dressed alike. Mark disliked school. He didn't like it at all. And then he ended up being a school teacher, and he loved being a school teacher, and he made sure the students, and the kids liked him. The kids liked him. He taught high school in Kearns, and the kids just really liked him as a school teacher, and he really enjoyed it. But growing up, he didn't like it that well.
Do you want to tell us anything that you might remember about Delora and Ray?
The thing that I remember about Ray, he was born in 1919. He was born. Was that no? I can't remember. Anyway,
He was 1919 because he's my mother's age.
Okay, he was not born in 1919, and I wasn't born until 1930. So he was a lot younger than me. So we really
A lot older.
A lot older than me. We really didn't do things together, but the thing I remember about him, he would go to work and he had this car that he was always parked out in front of the house, and he took good care of it. And the only person I ever remember him dating was Delora, and they ended up getting married. And I don't remember a lot about Ray, and of course I didn't know. Then after they got married, I got to know him better, and when we lived in Minnesota, they came back to visit us there, and
Ray could do anything in the house. He built anything. He had a pond out in the backyard, and he changed the rooms, and he finished off the basement. He could do anything, but he did not cook. He didn't like to cook, didn't know anything about cooking, whereas Mark did a lot of cooking, baked bread. He'd bake bread and take it for the sacrament meeting when he was bishop to the ward.
Mark ended up marrying Mark went to Finland on his mission, and ended up marrying a Finnish girl, Riley, and they got married in the Carson Temple in Canada. When she came over, she had to go through Canada to get back into the United States, and then he went up there and got married, and that's how she got into the United States, because he was married to her now and brought her in to the States. The thing is, they found out that the authorities found out that she was coming over to marry an American. And so they questioned her because they were going to ship her right back to Finland. And she told them the truth, that she was coming over to get married. And they said, because you told us the truth, we're going to let you in. So they let her into Canada, and then that's when they got married. Otherwise, they would have shipped her right back to Finland.
I've heard that it was hard on your mother when she had your little brother, the youngest.
Paul?
Paul. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yes, Paul was a Down syndrome child. He never did learn to talk, and he was very destructive. My mother couldn't have anything. He would open the cupboard doors that he could reach and pull all the pots and pans out. And if she had anything on the dining room table, she always had one of her crocheted tablecloths on the table. He would just pull the tablecloth off, and if there was anything on the table, he would break it. Well, my sister Lois, whose husband was a doctor, said it would be best for you if they put him in a home, and they have that home in American Fork, Utah, for disabled children, I can still remember the day that we went down to take him to the hospital down there, and my mother she cried, even though she knew it would probably be best, because he couldn't be left alone ever. Someone always had to be with him. And I didn't even know this happened till later on, but he got outside once, and my mother, and he started running away from my mother, and he ran down to 9th East. We lived on 10th East in Salt Lake, and 9th East is a very, very busy street. His name was Paul, and Paul got on his hands and knees and started crawling across the street. And my mother was after him to trying to catch him, and she finally caught him and brought him back home. But he spent all of his life. They took him down there when he was about 4 or 5 years old, and he spent the rest of his life in the American Fork. And he died. I don't remember when it was that he died. But he was an adult, but he never did learn how to talk or being able to do anything.
Ralph would know more about that because Ralph and Alda took a great interest in him and took him places.
Mm-hmm.
But my mother, like I say, he could never be left alone. So someone had to be with him at all times. So my mother couldn't, that was when they had Relief Society during the day. And my mother couldn't go to Relief Society because she couldn't leave Paul alone. And it was after they put him in the hospital that my mother was called into the Relief Society presidency, which was a blessing for her, which she wouldn't have been able to do if Paul had have stayed at home. But I'm sure there was a reunion for them because he wouldn't be that way after he died, and a great reunion for them. And now we do have a granddaughter, Greg and Mary Ann's daughter. She was born disabled. The part of her spine wasn't connected, so she never could walk. So she had something wrong with her brain, and she's, how old is she? 30 now?
31.
She's 31 years old now, and she's in a special care center. She's never been able to talk and always been in a wheelchair and that. So we do have a granddaughter she wasn't Down syndrome, it was just other medical problems that she had. So.
Did your mom have another child that passed away when they were young?
Yes,
Alice.
her second daughter, Alice was her name. She died in infancy, and that was between, she had Dora, then she had Alice, then she had Lois, and Alice died when she was about 16 or 17 months old, and I don't know what she died of.
Do you know any of, like how your mother did with that and your father?
No, I don't know anything about that.
16 months old?
Yeah, 16 months. And she was...
You don't know how she died?
That was way before I was born. And I do remember about my dad. He was working in a garden, and he took his gloves off and laid them down on the ground to eat lunch. And when he put his gloves back on, there was a black widow spider inside of his gloves, and he got bit by this black widow spider. And this was before I was born, and he was very, very sick. I can remember my mother telling me how sick he was from this black widow bite that he got after he put his gloves on. And
didn't he have a blessing or something? I mean,
no, he didn't have a blessing that I know of. She just told me how sick he was from this spider bite. And so stay away from black widow.
I would like to add just a spiritual experience about me. A year ago, maybe I told you when you were here, a year ago I fell on my motorized scooter and fractured my arm right here. And the whole arm was swollen, and they couldn't put a cast on because of where it was located. They didn't want to operate because of my age. So they thought, well, let's just let nature take its course and let it heal itself. Okay, at that time I thought, my mind went back to the pioneers crossing the plains. There was Mary Fielding Smith and her children, and and she had the children of Hiram's first wife with her, and Joseph Fielding was leading the oxen. And one of the gentlemen on the trip said, "Mary, you'll never make it to Salt Lake." And she says, "Oh yes, I will, and I will beat you." Well, on the way to Salt Lake, the oxen stopped and just dropped to the ground. Maybe you've heard this story before, but the point's the same. Mary got some consecrated oil for the healing of the sick. She didn't have the priesthood, but she had the faith. She administered to the oxen. The oxen got up and took her to Salt Lake. And she did beat that man. Oh, I thought if Mary could administer to an oxen and the Lord recognized that, I could administer to my arm. It's the same thing. I knew I would get well if he accepted her blessing. So I had a blessing. I took some consecrated oil and rubbed it on my arm. And the next day, from then on, and it's been a year, I've had no pain in that arm. I can only raise it this far, but manually I can take it up higher, but on its own I can only raise it this far. But I've had no pain in that at all, and it's still, it's a fractured arm right there. So he blessed me.
Is there any other spiritual experiences?
Well, I will tell you an experience that I had, a spiritual experience that I had when I was bishop. I lost my two counselors. One moved out west and the other one was called to the High Council. And so I had to get two new counselors. And I knew immediately who I wanted for one. But I thought, who will I get for the next one? So I got a piece of paper and I wrote down the names of every worthy man in the ward. And I decided to fast and pray about it. So I went to work on a Monday morning and I looked at the list and I thought, well, I'll cross him off and cross him off and cross him off. And I was fasting all the time, and I went to work Tuesday, starting my second day of fast, and I was getting a little bit weak from not having anything to food. And I had six names left on that sheet of paper that I hadn't crossed off. And I started thinking, and I'd pray about it, while I was at work. And I thought, why can't I get a phone call from one of these guys? And maybe that will be an answer. And then I thought, I can't think things like that because you're not supposed to think about things like that while you're praying and fasting. Well, I no sooner thought that than my telephone rang at work. And I answered the phone, and it was one of the names, 6 names that was on that piece of paper. And I thought, well, is this a sign or what? And I thought, well, I'll go to lunch. The guys that I usually go to lunch with came and said, let's go to lunch. And I said, well, I'm not going to go to lunch with you today. I have something else I have to do. They weren't members of the church, so they didn't know what I was doing. I stood up, and I had to hold on to my desk because I was feeling so weak. And I thought, it would be nice to have lunch with one of the names on this list. So I was up on the 3rd floor in the building where I worked, so I had to take the elevator down. So I walked out the elevator, and I pushed the button of the elevator, and the same guy that called me on the telephone got off the elevator. And I said, have you had lunch? And he said, no. And I said, well, why don't you have lunch with me today? And that's who I chose for my counselor. He was a student at the University of Minnesota. And I said, how come you came over here now? He says, I don't know. He says, I was sitting in a class, starting class, and all of a sudden, I had this urge that I had to be in downtown Minneapolis. He says, so I came over here, breaking speed limits to get over here as fast as I could. And he says, and you're the only person that I knew in downtown Minneapolis. And he says, and I almost missed you. So that was a blessing. That's how I got my second counselor, because of the thoughts that I had about having lunch with him and having the phone call. And he soon turned out to be an excellent counselor. So that was a spiritual experience that I had.
Thank you.
About no more than 5 months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, I can relate to Joseph Smith when he went into the grove to pray. He said this evil influence came over him and held him so to the ground he couldn't talk, he couldn't speak, and it was real, but he couldn't see it. I can relate to that. The other day, a few months ago, I had left the bathroom and I had my walker and I was going back to bed, and all of a sudden, my head became obsessed. Something was in my head, and it was pounding and it was crushing my head. And there were so many things in my head. It was excruciating pain, and I kept going down, down, down. I said, help me, help me, help me, help me. And all of a sudden, literally, I felt something go across my head like this. And that evil was gone. And I got up and went to bed.
Wow.
Evil spirits had just taken a hold of my brain, taken a hold of my head, and was crushing it. And the Lord wiped them away. I went to bed and just like nothing had happened.
Tell us your children by name, and then if you want to just tell us one or two things about each one of them.
Okay.
Or what would you like to tell them?
Our firstborn we named Gregory, and like I say, he's talented with the piano, and he is the church organist in every ward that he's lived in, and he graduated from BYU. And then our second child is Gary. Gary worked for New Skin, and he called me on the phone, and he says there's a listing, a brand new company in Provo that's opening up, and they need someone in personnel. And he says, I've had other job offers. Would it be okay to work at this New Skin company? I says, give it a try. If you don't like it, you can leave it. Well, that's the only job that he's ever had working for New Skin. He ended up being called as mission president in Panama. Galen graduated from BYU. He married a girl that went to BYU. She was from Oregon, so he went up to her home. That's where they lived all their life, up in Oregon. And he had a good job. And now he's retired and going on a mission to Richmond, Virginia. They're selling their home up there. We hope that they'll settle. They want to leave Oregon because Oregon isn't a good place to live, politics and everything. So they're selling their home, and we hope that they will settle here because two of their children live right here in Utah County. Our next is a daughter, Sharon, who married a returned missionary from Chile. She didn't graduate, but she went on a mission to Taiwan and enjoyed it over there. Our next daughter is Maureen.
Sweetheart, just a minute. As you talk about each one, say where they went on their mission.
I did. Oh, Greg went to
Central America.
Central America. Gary went to Peru. Galen went to Colorado.
Okay. Yeah.
Sharon went to Taiwan. Maureen didn't go on a mission because she got married when she was 19, and but she married a fellow that went to Sweden, on his mission, and they have their children have all gone on missions, and our next daughter.
She graduated from Ohio.
Oh yeah, and they settled in Ohio where her husband was dean back there, and she did graduate from the University of Ohio. Got her degree back there. Our next one is Susan. Susan went on a mission to Bolivia, and she graduated from BYU, and now she's a school teacher, and she loves teaching school.
Susan was called to a service mission.
Humanitarian
mission. It was so hard. Poor country. She said, and a lot of the girls didn't stay there full mission. She says, Mother, I would have come home before my mission was over with, but I didn't want to disappoint you.
So she stayed on her mission in Bolivia. And then our next one is Gordon. Gordon, he came out to BYU, but he ended up graduating from Utah State. And he went on a mission to California. And they're happily married. His wife served a mission in Florida. And then our next one is Bonnie. Bonnie came out to BYU, graduated from BYU, went on a mission to Korea. And then the thing is, when she came back, she worked for New Skin. New Skin wanted to open an office in Korea. So they sent her over to Korea to open up the office. And so she got to go back to her mission field, and she says, while I was on my mission, there was this big, beautiful hotel in Seoul, Korea, that I wish I could stay in, but I was a missionary and I couldn't stay in it. So that's the hotel she stayed in when she went back to open up an office for New Skin in Korea. But they all served well, and most of our grandchildren have served missions, and not all of them, but a lot of them. And we got a missionary map. Now, this missionary map that we have,
Wait till you show it to him so you can tell him about it.
well, I'll tell them now because they'll just be looking at this missionary map. If any of our children or grandchildren married someone that went on a mission, they get to go on the missionary map also. That's why we have so many missionaries on that map.
The joke is, we've got to go on a mission to get on the map.
Now, you're going to take them around and show some of these pictures that I've done. Let me tell you how I got started. My sister Dora called me on the telephone one time when we lived in Minnesota, and she says, I'm doing needlework that you might be interested in. You should get a kit and try it. So I did. And so Dora is the one that got me started. Otherwise, I never would have done it.
It's quite amazing. Before we do that really quick, would you tell just a couple special things about your wife?
My wife,
Put you on the spot now.
Yep.
my wife has always been a very, very good wife, an excellent mother, dedicated to the church. The church comes first in both of our lives, but she's always been dedicated to me, and we've had a good marriage, and I love her dearly, and look forward to 64 years and hope we have a few more years together. Oh, by the way, I renewed my driver's license a couple of months ago, and it expires on my 100th birthday, and I hope I get to renew it again.
Oh. So how old are you now?
I'm 92, and I was born in 1930, and my license expires on February 12th, 2030.
So either his license will expire first or he will.
I thought they only went for 5 years, but
No, they go for more than
8
that.
years.
that's.
I'll show it to you here.
I hope you live that long.
It's
too.
okay, honey.
But I was surprised when I looked at it, and the expiration date is, where is it?
On the back.
Whatever, honey. We believe you.
Okay, oh, date of birth, 2/12/1930, expiration 2/12/2030. 100 years, I'll be 100 years old when it expires.
That's amazing. Well, you two are you inspire me.
Oh, well, thank you.
That's really
Now you hear a lot of these stories, same stories, if you're going to do this with Riley. You do it with Riley?
I haven't done it with Riley yet, but I've thought about it.
Because she'll tell the same stories about Mark that maybe we did.
It's
Oh,
okay.
she'll tell a lot of different stories, I'm sure.
It's okay.
Okay, this is one of my favorite. I enjoy making all of them, but this one took a while, and I enjoy it because it has a lot of colors in it.
Is it called anything? Is there a name for it? Or?
No, it's just a
Can you point to it?
Blue ribbon.
a lot of them my children have now, but I enjoy doing it. I always do it. I just can't sit still and watch TV. I always have to be doing something. So this is what I do: is cross stitch needlework.
And you've done how many again?
Over 50. I put them in the state fair every year, and I always get a blue ribbon. Or I've got a couple of sweepstakes.
I think it's interesting that you used to sew dresses. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Well, she showed me how to do a pattern, and so I made her a few dresses, and one of our kids got married, and I made all the bridesmaid dresses. This one I saw at the state fair, and I liked it, and I wanted to get the pattern, so I found out who made it. A lady in Salt Lake, so I went to her home and she gave me the pattern, and I was able to get the pattern for this one through her. This is my wife's favorite. I made it especially for her, and I don't, what do you call it?
I don't know, it's just a delicate picture.
She enjoys it, so that's great.
That's not cross stitch, that's needlepoint.
That's the needlepoint that I did on the piano bench. This one I put in the state fair last fall. I got a sweepstake on it. It took over a year to do each one of these. And so they were a lot of work. And there's 128 different colors of thread in each one of them. Okay, these are two that I enjoyed. That one was from Russia.
Okay, the one on the end here is,
The materials came from Russia.
Missionary plaque.
This is our missionary map, and each one of our kids that have served a mission are on here, and our grandchildren. And if anyone married someone that went on a mission, they get to be on the map also. We have two grandchildren, two granddaughters that served in Ukraine, and they feel bad about what's going on over there now.
How many missionaries are there?
And there's a total now of 57. The numbers are on their picture and on the maps where they served. The numbers are on the maps.